The Pond was first published in 1985. It's a fine example of the type of documentary photography that I admire, belonging, I suppose, to the new topographics movement that developed in the 1970s. John Gossage was commuting around his home city of Washington, D.C. in Maryland, and he would often notice a fenced-off area of unused scrubland right next to the highway, one of these forgotten little pockets of semi-wilderness that many big city suburbs possess. Pieces of wasteland, semi-rural, semi-urban, neither one nor the other. A little forlorn oasis of ragged nature in the midst of the concrete and exhaust fumes. One day he couldn't resist the temptation any further. He stopped his car and followed the little trail of mud through the weeds and scrub. And this is his journey. No spectacular views on offer here. No shimmering volcanoes, no blazing sunsets, no majestic mountains or glorious expanses of lake. Just a trail, one can barely call it a path, a trail often blocked by brambles, obscure lines of wire, muddy puddles around a naturally occurring pond. A rather unprepossessing pond, it has to be said, not one that you would want to swim in or take a picnic to. It's more like the type of murky water bad-made films use to dispose of unwanted matter. All photographed in black and white, just to emphasize the glamour still further. So why do I love this series so much? And it's not just me, The Pond is now regarded as a classic photo book of its type. I've done videos on similar photographers and similar themes to this before, people like Keith Arnott, Raymond Moore, Robert Adams, and people do ask, what's so appealing about it? Many people find this type of work depressing and boring. The answer is not easy. One of the reasons I started this channel was to answer that question for myself. Why? Why do some photographs seem to possess the ability to move, to engage, to attract, to make me think and make me look at the world afresh every time I step outside? That, to make a world-weary middle-aged man look at the world around him with the enthusiasm of a child, is a remarkable achievement. But of course it depends on what you want from a photograph. Most people, I suppose, don't want to have to think or worry about it. They simply want a pretty picture, and that's fine. It's up to you to decide how deep you want to go. We all need a bit of escapism occasionally, or simply to slump down and relax in front of the TV. But it's also valuable, occasionally, to be challenged and engaged, both as a spectator and as a photographer. As a photographer, the challenge of people like Arnott and Moore, Robert Adams, John Gossage, the question they ask you is, where do you choose to look? Where do you choose to photograph? Why? Why there and not there? Do you go to Iceland and line up with 100 other photographers to get exactly the same shot of the Northern Lights? Or do you spend time exploring the half a mile of land between your house and the supermarket in an attempt to see things you hadn't noticed before? That miraculous juxtaposition of form and colour that had been hiding in plain sight all these years. Only you can decide that. Only you can decide whether you want to be an artist or a hack. That sounds patronising, but we all need to eat and pay the bills, of course, I appreciate that. It's the fundamental problem that artists have had over the centuries. How far do you compromise? Do you try and do meaningful work that you believe to be important and lasting, even if it may not be immediately appreciated or bring in money? And perhaps you have to work as a teacher or tossing burgers in McDonald's. Or is photography a simple commercial proposition for you? A way of making money with no pretense of art? I'm not saying that's bad. I'm sure there are people who actually enjoy being wedding photographers. It's just that I have no interest in it, and this channel tries to explore the other type. Let us continue our walk around the pond. The writer and curator Jerry Badger has called this series of work photographic literature, and I'd have to agree with that and contrast it with maybe 90% of landscape photography that floods the internet and social media, which is, I guess you could call, photographic spam in comparison, a sort of dumbed down Ansel Adams crossed with Walt Disney and a video game. For me personally, this walk through the bracken and the mud takes on an almost spiritual quality because it's about how we live our lives. What is meaningful to us in our everyday experience, being aware of the now and how the ordinary is very often extraordinary if we take the trouble to get out of our car and look. Looking is active. It requires a degree of effort and awareness, and of course an appreciation of what we are looking at. The ability to be astonished at the so-called ugly and mundane is a great gift. If a work is any good, it is normally open to interpretation. It remains open, expansive, ambiguous, suggestive, and you, the viewer, bring your own experiences and concerns to complete the work. Full of metaphor, these images are completed by your reading of them. Where does this path lead? We are in open ground, but the way ahead seems blocked. We cannot be sure what the future holds. There looks to be danger and confusion in front of us. Or is the danger behind us and we are looking back? Is not the open ground dangerous? Perhaps the trees offer safety and shelter. Do we carry on or turn back? Which direction should we take? Two sticks lying parallel to one another across the path. What does this mean? Is it just a coincidence? Did they just fall like that? Coincidences do happen. Or were they placed there, and if so, by whom? Are they pointing to a direction or barring our way? Just to the right, there are two other smaller twigs crossed like an arrowhead. Is this the direction? Or a warning? Or is this just a coincidence too? What meaning do we attribute to these symbols? Did somebody dump some builder's rubble here? Is it a termite mound? Or perhaps a burial mound? What is it doing here? We look up from the path. Do we see chaos in the branches above our heads? Tendrils threatening to scratch us, giving us a quick fright as they brush against our hair? Or do we see a poetry of form and formlessness, figure and ground like a beautiful Chinese painting? These photographs do have a sequence. There is a narrative at play here. We are being led or dragged along the broken trail. Sometimes we edge closer to the water, then sometimes we turn away from it once more. Like Dante, we are being led through, well, is it hell, paradise, or merely purgatory? Only you can decide that too. People live in their own private paradise or their own personalized hell, depending on how you perceive your surroundings. Perhaps that, after all, is the secret of life, who knows? Some people would say this is the same as seeing God in everything. Other people would say quite the opposite. It's the ability to be content in a world without gods. At any rate, Gossage urges us to occasionally stop our commuting, clamber over the fence, and take a look at the road less travelled. Do we lock the door? Or do we open the door to life, whatever it may bring? Are we at our journey's end, or is this just the beginning?